Namaste, and welcome to our continuing series on the life divine with our beloved Ranga. We are continuing in the chapter, The Origin of Falsehood and Evil, and we are on page 648, first paragraph.
We will read the summary of the previous paragraph so that we get the continuity. Okay, the previous paragraph. Now, he has told us that it is a vital ego that asserts itself, wants to expand itself out of ignorance, so it makes mistakes, and error gives place to falsehood, and falsehood leads to evil. So, I am reading the summary of the previous para. If this evil, how is nature to overcome it? That's the whole problem. But all this expansion, possession and conquest is being attempted by the vital ego for itself in a selfish spirit, and certainly not for unity, mutuality and harmony. This is how disharmony and discord arise, and these are the things that man calls wrongdoing and evil. But nature accepts evil and falsehood because they serve an evolutionary purpose. Falsehood and evil are products of ignorance, and the soul that is emerging out of ignorance into knowledge uses wrongdoing, falsehood and evil for its growth. It is error that points the way to truth. In another place he has said, error is the handmaiden of truth. In ignorance, consciousness bases itself on division and separation. In ignorance, Ananda takes joy of division and separateness, the joy of variety. Evolutionary nature uses all materials, good and bad, true and false, for its growth. Only the use of good would restrict severely its growth. It is also to be noted that nature makes no distinction between these opposites. They are neutral elements to be utilized for development. Yet, it is this very nature that implants a sense of right and wrong, good and evil in man, so that he may move towards the true and away from the false. This moral sense of good and evil has obviously its use and evolutionary purpose. This is what he said in the previous para. So now we read today what we have to read. But how is this evolutionary intention in nature to fulfill itself? By what power, means, impulsion, what principle and process of selection and harmonization? The method adopted by the mind of man through the ages has been always a principle of selection and rejection. This has taken the forms of a religious sanction, a social or moral rule of life, or an ethical ideal. But this is an empirical means which does not touch the root of the problem, because it has no vision of the cause and origin of the malady it attempts to cure. It deals with the symptoms, but deals with them perfunctorily, not knowing what function they serve in the purpose of nature, and what it is in the mind and life that supports them and keeps them in being. Moreover, human good and evil are relative, and the standards erected by ethics are uncertain as well as relative. What is forbidden by one religion or another, what is regarded as good or bad by social opinion, what is thought useful to society or noxious to it, what some temporary law of man allows or disallows, what is or is considered helpful or harmful to self or others, what accords with this or that ideal, what is prompted or discouraged by an instinct which we call conscience, an amalgam of all these viewpoints is the determining heterogeneous idea, constitutes the complex substance of morality. In all of them, there is a constant mixture of truth and half-truth and error. An error which pursues all the activities of our limiting mental knowledge ignorance. A mental control over our vital and physical desires and instincts, over our personal and social action, over our dealings with others is indispensable to us as human beings. And morality creates a standard by which we can guide ourselves and establish a customary control. But the control is always imperfect and it is an expedient, not a solution. Man remains always what he is and has ever been, a mixture of good and evil, sin and virtue, a mental ego with an imperfect command over his mental, vital and physical nature. We have read this. Now
Yes,
I remember.
I remember.
We have read it.
Yes.
So now we go to the endeavor to select. So he's telling us in this para that how does nature get away from evil and falsehood and goes higher. He says it is by selection and rejection. Selection of the good and rejection of the bad. But
It's all mixed.
it's all mixed up. Yeah. What we think is good, not necessarily good, and what we think is bad is not necessarily bad. So now the problem he has to solve. The endeavor to select, to retain from our consciousness and action all that seems to us good and reject all that seems to us evil, and so to reform our being. But actually Swami has used the word here, reform.
Yeah. Yeah, hyphenated.
Yeah, that means there is a formation and now you change the formation. You reform, change it from one form to another form. Our being, to reconstitute and shape ourselves in the image of an ideal, is a more profound ethical motive because it comes nearer to the true issue. It rests on the sound idea that our life is a becoming and that there is something which we have to become and be. But the ideals constructed by the human mind are selective and relative. To shape our nature rigidly according to them is to limit ourselves and make a construction where there should be growth into larger being. The true call upon us is a call of the infinite and the supreme. The self-affirmation and self-abnegation imposed on us by nature are both movements towards that, and it is the right way of self-affirmation and self-negation taken together in place of the wrong, because ignorant, way of the ego, and in place of the conflict between the yes and the no of nature that we have to discover. If we do not discover that, either the push of life will be too strong for our narrow ideal of perfection, its instrumentation will break and it will fail to consummate and perpetuate itself. Or at best a half result will be all that we shall obtain. Or else the push away from life will present itself as the only remedy, the one way out of the otherwise invincible grasp of the ignorance. This indeed is the way out usually indicated by religion. A divinely enjoined morality, a pursuit of piety, righteousness and virtue as laid down in a religious code of conduct a law of God determined by some human inspiration is put forward as a part of the means, the direction by which we can tread the way that leads to the exit, the issue. But this exit leaves the problem where it was. It is only a way of escape for the personal being out of the unsolved perplexity of the cosmic existence. In ancient Indian spiritual thought, there was a clearer perception of the difficulty. The practice of truth, virtue, right will, and right doing was regarded as a necessity of the approach to spiritual realization. But in the realization itself, the being arises to the greater consciousness of the infinite and eternal and shakes away from itself the burden of sin and virtue. For that belongs to the relativity and the ignorance. Behind this larger, truer perception lay the intuition that a relative good is a training imposed by world nature upon us so that we may pass through it towards the true good, which is absolute. These problems of the mind and the ignorant life, these problems are of the mind and the ignorant life. They do not accompany us beyond mind. As there is a cessation of the duality of truth and error in an infinite truth consciousness, so there is a liberation from the duality of good and evil in an infinite good. There is transcendence. So here he is saying how to go beyond evil and falsehood. Religion tries its best and gives you a moral code, but the moral code is not enough. But in India, there was a clearer perception. If you want to get away from falsehood and evil, you have to go beyond the ignorance, beyond the mind. Then, individually you have solved your problem, but the world problem is not solved. So, I read the summary of what he is saying. The vital mind tries for expansion, possession, domination and mastery. But this is an ego-based effort and therefore defective. The next stage in the evolution is a mind-based ethical way, morality. It's an improvement over the vital way and its methods. The ethical reconstruction of our being recognizes a graduated transformative ascent and therefore a better way. But still, it's a rigid mental construction. The true call in man is for the infinite and the supreme. Nature's imposition on man of good and evil, the tendency towards the good and distancing away from the evil, are both useful to man in his upward progress. But there is a right way of rejection and a wrong way of rejection. Similarly, there is a right way of accepting, admitting into oneself influences, force, vibrations, and a wrong way also. That is what man has to discover and practice. So, what is this right and wrong way? Nature attracts us towards the pleasant and causes repulsion away from the unpleasant. This is ego-based. God pushes us towards the good and away from the evil. The pleasant and the good are not the same thing. Man must learn to distinguish between the Shreyas and the Preyas, the pleasant and the good. The pleasant may be bad for the soul, and the unpleasant may be very good for the soul. Nature's ego-based method can be religious. It often rejects the world. God's way is spiritual. It does not reject, it transforms. This is what he is saying in the para. So, first of all, there is a religious advice of morality, but that is not, it doesn't work out. it's better than the vital ego's doings.
Where he says it's from God through some person.
Yeah. Okay. And then finally the Indian idea is go beyond, so that you. So now we read the next para. There can be no artificial escape from this problem, which has always troubled humanity and from which it has found no satisfying issue. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, with its sweet and bitter fruits, is secretly rooted in the very nature of the inconscience from which our being has emerged and on which it still stands as a nether soil and basis for our physical existence. It has grown visibly on the surface in the manifold branchings of the ignorance, which is still the main bulk and condition of our consciousness in its difficult evolution towards a supreme consciousness and an integral awareness. As long as there is this soil with the unfound roots in it and this nourishing air and climate of ignorance, the tree will grow and flourish and put forth its dual blossoms and its fruit of mixed nature. It would follow that there can be no final solution until we have turned our inconscience into the greater consciousness, made the truth of self and spirit our life basis, and transformed our ignorance into a higher knowledge. All other experience will only be makeshifts or blind issues. A complete and radical transformation of our nature is the only true solution. It is because the inconscience imposes its original obscurity on our awareness of self and things, and because the ignorance bases it on an imperfect and divided consciousness, and because we live in that obscurity and division, that wrong knowledge and wrong will are possible. Without wrong knowledge, there could be no error or falsehood. Without error or falsehood in our dynamic parts, there could be no wrong will in our members. Without wrong will, there could be no wrongdoing or evil. While these causes endure, the effects also will persist in our action and in our nature. A mental control can only be a control, not a cure. The mental teaching, rule, standard can only impose an artificial groove in which our action revolves mechanically or with difficulty, and which imposes a curbed and limited formation on the course of our nature. A total change of consciousness, a radical change of nature, is the one remedy and the sole issue. So what he's saying is that the inconscience is a permanent soil of good and bad, evil and falsehood. Everything is there, truth and falsehood. So long as the inconscience is there, it will go on producing this. So there has to be a total change of the inconscience itself. That is what he was trying to do, Sri Aurobindo. He was trying to bring down the supramental light into the inconscience and push it further down. Inconscience will never disappear, but it can be pushed further down. That is the whole theme of Sri Aurobindo's poem, A God's Labour.
Yes.
I have been digging deep and long mid
a horror of filth and mire.
Yeah, filth and mire. So that filth and mire is the inconscience. And so if you can clear that, then you are starting not from inconscience, but from some sort of conscience. So the elimination of falsehood and evil is very, very possible if that can be done. Okay, so I just read the summary of this and go on to the next paragraph.
Good.
We have discussed it briefly. This attempt of morality to change human nature is bound to fail because the roots of our being are deeply embedded in the inconscience. The inconscience is the tenebrous base from which the evolutionary ascent commences. It throws its darkness and its ignorance on all that climbs out of it. The tree of knowledge, rooted in the soil of inconscience, produces flowers and fruits of a dual nature, sweet and bitter, good and evil. But for nature, these are neutral values. Therefore, no solution to the problem of human imperfection can be final, which does not recognize this basic fact. The inconscience itself has to be changed, or the ascent of consciousness has to climb sufficiently high so as to escape from the miasma of the inconscience. But this is an individual solution. An individual can escape from the clinging clutch of the inconscience by climbing high enough to be out of reach of the nether roots. This is the individual solution. But what of universal nature? That, the perfection of the external world, can only be when the inconscience itself is changed by the penetration of the higher light into the darkness of the nether base. So this is what the Srila was trying to do. That penetration of the higher light is a supramental. And they have been able to bring that down, but now it's a question of time. That's what he's saying. That is why Sri Rama's mother brought down the supermind into matter. That last is, of course, my comment, not the. So now we can read the next para.
Okay.
Can we? No. But since the root of the difficulty is a split, limited, and separative existence, this change must consist in an integration, a healing of the divided consciousness of our being. And since that division is complex and many-sided, no partial change on one side of the being can be passed off as a sufficient substitute for the integral transformation. Our first division is that created by our ego, and mainly, most forcefully, most vividly by our life ego, the vital ego, which divides us from all other beings as not self and ties us to our egocentricity and the law of an egoistic self-affirmation. It is in the errors of this self-affirmation that wrong and evil first arise. Wrong consciousness engenders wrong will in the members, in the thinking mind, in the heart, in the life mind, and in the sensational being. In the very body consciousness, wrong will engenders wrong action of all these instruments. A multiple error and a many branching crookedness of thought and will and sense and feeling. Nor can we deal rightly with others so long as they are to us others, beings who are strangers to ourselves and whose inner consciousness, soul need, mind need, heart need, life need, body need, we know little or nothing. The modicum of imperfect sympathy, knowledge and goodwill that the law, need and habit of association engender is a poor quantum of what is required for a true action. A larger mind, a larger heart, a more ample and generous life force can do something to help us or help others and avoid the worst offenses. But this too is insufficient and will not prevent a mass of troubles and harms and collisions of our preferred good with the good of others. But the very nature of our ego and ignorance by the very nature of our ego and ignorance, we affirm ourselves egoistically even when we most pride ourselves on selflessness, and ignorantly even when we most pride ourselves on understanding and knowledge. Altruism, taken as a rule of life, does not deliver us. It's a potent instrument for self-enlargement and self-correction of the narrower ego, but it does not abolish it, nor transform it into the true self, one with all. The ego of the altruist is as powerful and absorbing as the ego of the selfish, and it is often more powerful and insistent because it's a self-righteous and magnified ego. It helps still less if we do wrong to our soul, to our mind, life or body, with the idea of subordinating ourselves to the self of others. A very interesting point, we'll discuss that.
Yes.
To affirm our being rightly so that it may become one with all is the true principle, not to mutilate or immolate it. Self-immolation may be necessary at times, exceptionally for a cause, in answer to some demand of the heart or for some right or high purpose, but cannot be made the rule or nature of life. So exaggerated, it will only feed and exaggerate the ego of others or magnify some collective ego, not lead us or mankind to the discovery and affirmation of our or its true being. Sacrifice and self-giving are indeed a true principle and a spiritual necessity, for we cannot affirm our being rightly without sacrifice or without self-giving to something larger than our ego. But that too must be done with a right consciousness and will founded on a true knowledge. To develop the sattvic part of our nature, a nature of light, understanding, balance, harmony, sympathy, goodwill, kindness, fellow feeling, self-control, rightly ordered and harmonized action is the best we can do in the limits of the mental formation. But it's a stage and not the goal of our growth of being. These are solutions, by the way, palliatives, necessary means for a partial dealing with this root difficulty, provisional standards and devices given us as a temporary help and guidance, because the true and total solution is beyond our present capacity and can only come when we have sufficiently evolved to see it and make it our main endeavor. Now, this is a very, very interesting para.
Very interesting.
And we have to go into detail. He is saying that denying yourself also is not good. Over egoistic action is not good. Denying yourself and trying to do good to others also is equally bad, he is saying. And then again he says sacrifice is necessary. So it's a very complicated para.
We have plenty of time,
Okay.
25 minutes.
Yeah, so we'll have to look at this very
We'll
carefully.
look very carefully.
Yeah.
Because there was, in 1972, Madhav Pandit said to me when I was asking him about Oroville, he said, the time for self-development is over. Now is the time for collective development. He said, self-development will come later. Do you agree with that?
No,
I don't also.
they are both going together. What about those who don't live in a collective society? Suppose I don't live in Oroville.
Yes.
I don't live in the ashram, I live elsewhere. So self-development is necessary for him. And it's only a way of saying, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
It's a way of saying, he's saying that only self-development is over. That's what he means. If you add the
okay.
word only, everything makes sense.
Yes, that's better, yes.
Only self-development, no. You have to now collective self-development, you have to start. That's
And
what
that
it
is so difficult in this paragraph.
So we'll have a look at that. Okay, so it's a very long para.
Very long, yes.
But since the root of the difficulty is a split, limited and separative existence, this change must consist in an integration a healing of the divided consciousness of our being. And since that division is complex and many-sided, no partial change on one side of the being can be passed off as a sufficient substitute for an integral transformation. A big sentence. So what he's saying is that normal life for humanity is based on division. Division. He uses the word split, yes. Limited, separative existence. I am quite separate from you. Even if I work with you, we may clash. So it's based on healing. That is the main problem, he says. That separation, sense of separation must go. That's what he's insisting. Okay, so division is complex and many-sided. Okay, no partial change on one side of the being can be passed off as a sufficient substitute for integral transformation. There should be no division at all, neither in the individual nor in society. In society, if everybody felt that we are part of Auroville and we have to work in harmony with each other and put away our partial opinions, then it will work. Mm-hmm. But for that, requirement is abolition of ego, and that's not possible. So you have to keep trying for it. So, I read the next sentence. Our first division is that created by our ego, and mainly, most forcefully, most vividly by our life ego. So, first of all, he is talking of ego, which can be in the mind, but he is saying the life ego, the vital ego is the worst offender. The vital ego. Mental ego can still be sattvic, but the vital ego is rajasic, is blind. So, our first division is that created by our ego, and mainly, most forcefully, most vividly by our life ego, vital ego, which divides us from all other beings as not self and ties us to our egocentricity and the law of an egoistic self-affirmation. We are constantly trying to think of our own good. That's what he's saying. So, he will come to that little later on. When you try even not to do that also, the problem will remain. Okay, so then affirmation. It is in the errors of the self-affirmation that wrong and evil first arise. So when you are trying to do everything only for yourself, that wrong will come. Okay, wrong and evil first arise. Now he is giving a very interesting sequence. Wrong consciousness engenders wrong will. Okay, so and what is wrong consciousness? Based on the ego. If ego is the base, it's a wrong consciousness, because you are not thinking of others, you are thinking only of yourself. So,
and it will produce wrong will.
Yeah. So, now see the sequence. Wrong consciousness engenders wrong will in the members. And what are the members? Thinking mind, heart, life mind, and sensational being. In the very body consciousness. Okay, so these are the members. Thinking mind, your mind, the heart, the higher vital, life mind, and the sensational being. Okay, life mind is the vital mind, and the sensational being, the physical vital part, sensational being. Okay, the nerves. When you experience hot or cold, it is part of the sensational being. It's neither a mental feeling nor is it a vital thing. It is sensational, purely sensational. So that also he is saying. In the very body consciousness, wrong will engenders wrong action of all these instruments. The instruments he has told us. What are the instruments? Okay, instruments are thinking mind, heart, life, vital mind, and sensation being, and the very body consciousness. These are the instruments. So wrong consciousness will give wrong will, and wrong will engenders wrong action. in all these instruments. A multiple error and many branching crookedness of thought and will and sense and feeling. So, thought is one thing. Will, that which goads you to action, and sense and feeling, all can be wrong. Nor can we deal rightly with others so long as they are to us others, beings who are strangers. So long as we feel that they are something other than me, the ego is there. Remember, that's why we define the ego as the feeling of separation. As soon as you feel that you are separate from this, that's the ego.
And yet it seems practically impossible.
Yeah. No, when you are in the cosmic consciousness, the ego disappears.
Until we rise up higher,
Yeah.
yes.
You have to go there where you feel you are part of everything and everything is part of you. Then the ego disappears. That's possible in the higher mind onwards. The higher mind also you can have the cosmic consciousness. Third, very sincere. Nor can we deal rightly with others so long as they are to us others, beings who are strangers to ourselves and of whose inner consciousness soul need, mind need, heart need, life need, body need, we know little or nothing. And unless I know what you need, how am I going to help you or how am I going to cooperate with you? I can't. That's what he's saying. Because we don't know the others. They are all strangers to us. The modicum of imperfect sympathy, knowledge and goodwill that the law, need and habit of association engender is a poor quantum of what is required for true action. So he is saying that even in a society, when we say let's help each other, the modicum of imperfect sympathy, knowledge, goodwill, even when that is there, that the law, need and habit of association engender is a poor quantum of what is required for a true action. The mental effort at harmony will never succeed. That's what he's saying. The vital doesn't even try for harmony. The mental tries for harmony, but that's also not enough. Okay, so required for true action. A larger mind, a larger heart, a more ample and generous life force can do something to help us or help others and avoid the worst offenses. So when you when you are idealistic and you govern yourself by the mind and not by the vital, some help can be there, but that will not solve the problem. But this too is insufficient and will not prevent a mass of troubles and harms and collisions of our preferred good with the good of others. The good of my good is not the good of your good. So there will always be a clash, if it is mental. By the very nature of our ego and ignorance, we affirm ourselves egoistically, even when we most pride ourselves on selflessness, and ignorantly, even when we most pride ourselves on understanding and knowledge. So now he is bringing in humanitarianism, charity, altruism. I am trying to do good for others, wonderful. But is it ego based? So I am just saying it can be even more ego than otherwise. Okay, so altruism, taken as a rule of life, altruism is helping others, doing things for others. Humanitarianism, charity, taken as a rule of life, does not deliver us. It's a potent instrument for self-enlargement and for correction of the narrower ego, but it does not abolish it, nor transform it into the true self, one with all. The true self is when you feel yourself to be one with all. Okay, so the ego cannot be abolished by humanitarianism, charity, philanthropy. It doesn't help. But it does not abolish it or transform itself. Okay. The ego of the altruist is as powerful and absorbing as the ego of the selfish. And it is often more powerful and insistent because it is self-righteous and magnified ego. I am helping others, I am feeding 1,000 people, I have helped others, I have given money for a student to complete his education. See, I am doing some such good work. So the self-righteousness comes in and you take pride in it. Okay. It is for satisfying your own ego that you are doing that. By itself it is good. It's a good thing you are doing in society. But it is not going to help you spiritually. Spiritually, this will not help. Charity will not help. Okay. It helps still less if we do wrong to our soul, to our mind, life and body, with the idea of subordinating ourselves to the self of others. Now this is very interesting what he is saying. He says that if you deny yourself for the sake of others, that's equally bad. You have to develop yourself. It has to be done in the right way. Okay, so there was a case in Ramakrishna's entourage. Okay, there was a gentleman called Nag Mahasaya. He was a very, very, very humble person. And he was a real problem to the family, because anybody who used to come, he used to help them with money, with food and everything, and the family would suffer. So, this is one case like that. So, that's not necessarily a good thing, that's what Swami is saying. Okay. To affirm our being rightly, so that it may become one with all, is a true principle. You have to pay full attention to yourself, okay? Not egoistically, but with the right consciousness. Okay? To affirm our being rightly, so that it may become one with all, is a true principle. Not to mutilate or immolate it. You should not harm yourself. Okay? To affirm our being rightly, so that it may become one with all, is a true principle, not to mutilate or immolate. Self-immolation may be necessary at times, exceptionally for a cause, in answer to some demand of the heart or for some right or high purpose, but cannot be made the rule or nature of life. Now he has discussed this problem in other places also. He has said, for instance, the mother bird that fights against the aggressor to save its own, it is willing to sacrifice itself. That is okay. Then the patriot who fights and immolates himself on the battlefield for his country, that's okay. You are not doing it with an egoistic attitude. When you immolate yourself with an egoistic attitude, it's bad. Look, I am denying myself things. How noble I am not even selfish. That is egoism. Very interesting. Okay, so self-immolation may be necessary at times, exceptionally for a cause, in answer to some demand of the heart or for some right or high purpose, but cannot be made the rule of or nature of life. So exaggerated, it will only feed and exaggerate the ego of others or magnify some collective ego, not lead us or mankind to the discovery and affirmation of our true or its true being. Okay? Now he is saying that if I go on denying myself, the others will take full advantage of me. Their ego will rise. So how does that help? So complicated. Okay? Sacrifice and self-giving are indeed a true principle and a spiritual necessity. But it has been done without ego. If it is done with ego, wrong. Okay. So, sacrifice and self-giving are indeed a true principle and a spiritual necessity. For we cannot affirm our being rightly without sacrifice or without self-giving to something larger than our ego. It shouldn't be ego-based. It should be done for the Lord. Then it's okay. Okay. But that too must be done with the right consciousness and will, founded on a true knowledge. To develop the sattvic part of our nature, a nature of light, understanding, balance, harmony, sympathy, goodwill, kindness, fellow feeling, self-control, rightly ordered and harmonized action. Incidentally, he has defined what sattvic nature is, okay, in detail. This is what sattvic nature is. It is the best we can do in the limits of the mental formation. But it's a stage and not the goal of our growth of being. These are solutions, by the way, palliatives. Palliatives, temporary solutions, okay, temporary cure. Necessary means for a partial dealing with this root difficulty. Provisional standards and devices given us as a temporary help and guidance, because the true and total solution is beyond our present capacity and can only come when we have sufficiently evolved to see it and make it our main endeavor. So, morality, charity, humanitarianism is good, but it's not solution, but it is a help. When you are imperfect, it's a help. But when you realize its difficulties, then you have to go to the next level. Now, if that is so, when can the true solution come? The true solution can intervene only when, by our spiritual growth, we can become one self with all beings, know them as part of ourself, deal with them as if they were our other selves. For then, the division is healed, the law of separate self-affirmation leading by itself to affirmation against or at the expense of others is enlarged and liberated by adding to it the law of our self-affirmation for others and our self-finding in their self-finding and self-realization. It has been made a rule of religious ethics, to act in a spirit of universal compassion, to love one's neighbor as oneself, to do to others as one would have them do to us, to feel the joy and grief of others as one's own. But no man living in his ego is able truly and perfectly to do these things. He can only accept them as a demand of his mind, an aspiration of his heart, an effort of his will to live by high standard and modify by sincere endeavor his crude ego nature. It is when others are known and felt intimately as oneself that this ideal can become a natural and spontaneous rule of our being, our living, and be realized in practice as in principle. But even oneness with others is not enough by itself, if it is a oneness with their ignorance, for then the law of ignorance will work and error of action and wrong action will survive, even if diminished in degree and mellowed in incidence and character. Our oneness with others must be fundamental, not a oneness with their minds, hearts, vital selves, egos. Even though these come to be included in our universalized consciousness, but a oneness in the soul and spirit, and that can come only by our liberation into soul awareness and self-knowledge. To be ourselves liberated from ego and realize our true selves is the first necessity. All else can be achieved as a luminous result and necessary consequence. That is one reason why a spiritual call must be accepted as imperative and take precedence over all other claims, intellectual, ethical, social, that belong to the domain of the ignorance. For the mental law of good abides in that domain and can only modify and palliate. Nothing can be a sufficient substitute for the spiritual change that can realize the true and integral good, because through the spirit we come to the root of action and existence. We'll do this in detail next time.
Yes.
It's again quite interesting and needs to be discussed. The true solution.
Namaste all, and we will see you Let's see now, today is Saturday. We'll see you on Monday. We are on page 653, and we will go over that paragraph in the chapter, The Origin of Falsehood and Evil.